Thank you. Hello. So like it was told, the topic is future of payments. As you have noticed, today is a payment card day as opposed to yesterday where we've been talking about PSD2 and euro payments. So we may change the topic to future of payment cards, maybe, no? And all of the participants are quite technical, so you could also ask questions of any technical complexity as well. So as usual, we are completely unprepared. We have our application where you are very encouraged to ask questions right now. But we already have a few questions, and the rules are, well, there are no rules, but so basically we have a question, so everyone could comment. If you don't have a comment, just pass the mic to the next person. And question number one, how long will the payment cards exist? Will instant payment kill them? I guess it's European instant payment, right? Can you take the mic?
On two, yeah. So yeah, it's the instant payments are only in Europe, so it will take time to speak with people from Canada, from US, that they still think that in Europe it's quite, the innovation here with EMVCo and all of these things are much higher, and all this open banking, it will take years to get there to US, or it will be different. They will just pass to another step right away.
And what about Europe?
With Europe, I think like at least 10-15 years, because the same I'm kind of trying to see when the cryptocurrencies will be accepted. They're not. That's fact. They're not accepted. And same with the open banking, all these instant payments. Let's see how much time it will take. Let's see how the 3D Secure will pick up with the merchants with 2.0 and all of these things. So after the 3D Secure will be accepted by the merchants, we can talk about instant payments accepted by the merchants. So everything takes time, that's for sure. So 10 years at least, I would say, the cards will stay in Europe.
Okay, so we're comparing crypto payments with instant payments. Good.
Yes,
No?
Of course.
Any other opinions on this?
I think, I don't know how many of you know, but I think we already have instant payments in India of sorts, which is essentially directly account to account, instantaneously. But I'm not sure of the numbers there, but I think the cards might take a small hit, but I still see people using cards. I think it's also a Google Pay and all of these other initiatives that cards are kind of coming up with. I don't see that it might just die, but I think it'll take other shapes and forms, I think.
But does India have a local payment scheme as well?
By scheme, do you mean network?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. So there's a local network also which is called RuPay, which is a government initiated thing, it's similar to what you have in your, like Germany at least, Giro card, which is a lower interchange and so on. So that is also kind of being pushed and is popular at least in India.
Mm-hmm. And can you use it outside of India for e-commerce?
No, it's India only, but that's what, like you always need generally a card if you're doing transactions on different. Even if I want to do a transaction on US for whatever reason, I still need MasterCard Visa. So like he said, there's obviously this use case of international connectivity, but I think even in local markets, there are use cases where people still use for ATMs and so on, you always need a card. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think the credit card payments will stay, but I see a good future for instant payments in online payments because it's a newer technology and the protocols are less insane, let's say so. And I think anybody except Erik do not like this ISO 8583. He's the only one. So I think that that instant payments could overtake the online payment part because they are easier to implement and probably much nicer to work with.
There's one more.
Cool. So I think a lot of good things are already answered, and I think the answer is almost completed. Also, maybe the different angle how to look at this question is whether MasterCard and Visa will stay, or will anything else kill them. So from this angle, I think nothing will kill them anytime soon, because in addition to the tech designers and innovators, at the same time they are also like investors in other technologies. And if we take a look at Visa's and MasterCard's investment portfolios, at least even in Europe, then they are actually backing up a lot of like new fintechs. It might be directly by acquiring, or it might be by signing some like great deals and like supporting their technology, and then by that having an influence and impact. So I think even if something will replace the card networks, then in terms of the influence in the market, they will still be winners of the game for a long time.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got one more question about Apple Pay and Google Pay. So are they threatening competition in Europe, for example? So like, is there a point doing other wallets and stuff if they'll penetrate the market? Can they somehow do an unfair competition or something?
So I think that wallets from Apple, for example, or their card in general, they will always will have tendency to look sexier and nicer and shinier in the eyes of consumer. So in these terms, I guess they will take a really significant part of the market. For example, today I'm using a transference card, and nearly all my transactions I'm doing with Apple Pay, because it's just so convenient. You switch over and then you don't see the future, or you don't like imagine how would you be doing it without your phone, because that is eventually your muscular memory. So when you go to buy something, it is just so intuitive, you do it. And in terms of competing with those proprietary banks, like own-made wallet solutions, so I think the market for that will be always open, like it has been designed from EMV Co. For schemes, it also doesn't matter, but I think for individual banks, it is very difficult to compete.
Just a couple of words wants to add it about this e-commerce payments, and Apple Pay actually is doing as well the e-commerce acceptance, and I think they will actually increase their they will grow there for sure, and they will gather more support with the e-commerce payments. So I'm not sure about the physical acquiring, that they will be easily replicating what Visa and MasterCard did already with the network and spreading out the POSs and all of these things. So they will definitely stay with Visa and MasterCard and all these acquirers, but from the e-commerce they can just go by their own way, I would say.
I think it's very hard, at least the perception for me is it's actually hard to compete with Apple Pay, Google Pay, because they already own hardware. It's like the default that comes out. Supporting other payments, other wallets essentially is an additional effort. I don't know how many companies will take, but I think it's also about innovation and pricing, right? I don't know if Samsung comes up with some schemes or offers, or if Garmin comes up with something which pleases the customer to kind of override their default wallet provider. I think it might be, but at least at the moment, I think it's very tricky to kind of dominate this business in front of these two players.
Do you know if Google or Apple are going to provide loans via their apps? Just take a mic.
If I remember correctly, there is Apple Credit already in the US. You pay with Apple Pay for your Apple stuff. So they already started that. So that's what's coming. All the Apple resellers will just at one moment, because they're certified as well, they can say, sorry, we accept only Apple Pay. And that would be the trick as well, because a lot of Apple certified shops, right? They're all certified. And if Apple say that, sorry, you just accept Apple Pay from now on, you get not small volume added to the game.
And do they already have a banking license? Do you know?
No, that's actually I don't know about the banking license.
Okay, I have a very popular question, not from here, but I've got a call today from local radios. They've been asking about the conference, how it goes and why, and so on. And they've voiced the most popular question, which relates to payment cards from consumer perspective, and which is, are contactless cards less secure, or mobile cards, mobile virtual cards, NFC based, are less secure than classic plastic? Do you have, so it's like a consumer question. So should I go for it, or just say, oh no, this is for kids, and I will stay with the real one? Because as I've been told, there are lots of people who disable contactless for purpose.
I think it's less secure, for sure. That's why you add the limits and you limit your exposure. That's why there's PSD2, which says 3 times or 150, and chip and pin, please, pin code. So definitely less secure. And with these NFC payments, let's take, I think Apple is okay, but with Google, I'm not sure what are the requirements on the Google side for the wallets to enable these NFC payments, and how strict policies, because I know in Android there are policies, of course, which you can enforce on the device, but this is already up to the issuers and the token service providers to actually make sure that when they enable this functionality, that all these root policies and all of these things are disabled on an Android device, because that's not that easy with the Apple device, at least from the consumer's perspective.
So I think the contactless cards by themselves are definitely a bit less secure, but it's also a calculated risk. So you on the one hand you have usability, and on the other hand you have a small amount of risk depending on what limits you set. But previously I worked on implementation of MasterCard cloud-based payments on the phone, and I think that using these kind of like digitized cards on the mobile phone is actually more secure than contactless payments, and even more secure than your regular card. Well, for one thing is that you have to enter some PIN code or your fingerprint for this application to start. Well, at least that was the case with MasterCard version 1.0. 1.1 they introduced pinless payments and so, but at least that version was more secure. And the good thing is that also, unlike regular contactless cards, these kind of like digitized, I don't know how to call them, cloud-based payments, they actually receive some feedback from the issuer online. Every time the phone is online, they receive some updates. So.
Okay. So next question. Does anyone have any thoughts on the consolidation of payments industry and how this might impact fintechs? So more global payment companies are becoming consolidated, and the latest news were Worldline acquiring Ingenico. So Worldline being a processor and Ingenico being a post-terminal manufacturer. So what does it mean?
If I remember correctly, Worldline is manufacturing the devices as well. So it's actually Worldline acquiring is acquiring. So, but yeah, this is actually a very interesting trend right now happening, and this definitely will affect the fintechs. So if any of the fintech will do things which are not very welcome to the, or they disrupt too much, then they will definitely be acquired, because it's not that hard to acquire the fintech. Except if you're not a Revolut, of course, or N26 or TransferWise, you know, that's for sure. But the smallest fintechs you can acquire pretty easily. But at least from the acquiring, as a issuer, I'm a little bit happy to hear about the acquiring, because on the acquiring level there is problems between different devices, and then you have issues with the acceptance as an issuer. So let's players to talk to kind of more stable the card works, and that's what is important for me as an issuer.
No questions? All right, so the next one, do you expect more or less regulations due to a growing number of new market players, and what is happening right now with all the neo banks and payment cards?
From my perspective, I think there will be more regulations, because it's basically, take as example the Revolut, who is like doing some things which has been asked today as well. How, why, how they are doing, you know, full card number in the app, and no one else is doing that. Why? And this kind of questions the audit of the PCI, how it went. So it's like definitely will create. Basically, I think that until someone will really like expose all the card numbers to the internet, you know, by some hack or something like that, there will be more like strict regulations, or maybe the PCI DSS version will be updated, or more like a force from the schemes to do that pretty often, like once per 6 months, for example. Or there will be more like related things as well related to PSD2. Right now, I think it's just the beginning with what PSD2 is doing with this 153 times, all of these things, and about the e-commerce, they're having new requirements as well, what you need to monitor and react. So I think it's only the beginning, what's coming.
So definitely more regulations, but at the same time, I think that PCI DSS and I think especially PA DSS, which you have to go through as a vendor of the software, they are becoming more and more crazy, up to the point that you shouldn't keep a plain text card number in the computer's memory. Fortunately, it's not a requirement yet, but it's a proposition and it's still being discussed. So what I see is that they make implementing card payments harder and harder, and by that they are pushing others to use alternative ways of paying.
Okay, I have a question from myself. So it was mentioned a couple of times today that payment networks are not stagnating, they are inventing stuff, proposing to use new stuff. So what are your top innovations recently which are coming from payment networks in terms of APIs or other things like that? New capabilities which you could not have used before?
That's a good question, because I have this. Have you heard? Maybe I'll a little bit disrupt your question. Have you heard about Nexo Payments, new protocol ISO 20022? Any? That sounds no. Yes, yes.
Sounds
it's, so not 8583, but 20022. So this is basically, as I understood, the protocol which the merchants are starting to develop. And of course, the pitch there is that you develop it once, you certify, it's very strict certification, and then you connect to any other payment processing system.
Is it XML based? Oh.
I don't know, to be honest. Their specification is not published, actually. It's not open specification, but they claim that there are players, they are Visa and MasterCard are members of this Nexo protocol as well. And they claim that it's plug and playable to any payment processing system. So it's basically the merchants are taking this into their control, and of course they want to exchange more data. For example, you know, when you want to calculate the loyalty or some carbon footprint, right? That's one of the trends right now, that you need to know what the person has purchased. Otherwise, you cannot calculate the loyalty only for the gas or carbon footprint. You don't know the shopping cart, what was there. So they are extending the protocol as well, and there are a lot of players in this. So basically, that's I think the biggest what I heard, except Apple Pay, of course, or Google Pay, but I haven't had much time to investigate. So I don't know, maybe someone else knows more about it.
So we are talking a very, very like European or Western world centric things here, because like we are very used to access to banking, financial inclusion, like we all have bank accounts and it's not a problem to get one. But if you think about like future of payments, not in terms of the calendar-based meaning of the word, but in the philosophical way of thinking, then we can also think about how many people in the world actually have access to banking, and it's actually quite low number, so it's close to 60%. So almost half of the world, if we like tell it in a like very dramatic way, don't even have a bank account. And I think if we think about the innovation and like speed of development of the market, definitely things are happening much faster in those areas of the world, in emerging markets, where everything is developing from zero to something, you know, not having an ability to be financially included and be able to transact with your neighbor, towards getting the first options to do that. And in these terms of things, I think like if you look at you know, cellular network-based economies in Africa, or you know, a lot of new, completely different, weird-looking ways of paying in Asia, then a lot of really cool and very, very rapid innovation is happening actually in those markets.
Like QR codes and stuff?
For instance, yes, like, I mean, in Asia there are like, you know, several like steps of recent things which are booming, and actually the fastest growing fintechs today are located somewhere in Southern Korea and countries like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, maybe like the point is, when thinking about the future of payments, probably the most influential change that some fintech or some organization can make is to find a way how to connect people financially to some sort of either banking or the alternative of banking.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll add a bit from there. Is this on? No, I don't know if this is on. I think it is. Okay. I think like adding to that, what happened in Asia. So like having experienced some of this firsthand, I think there was a rise in this QR codes kind of standard, right? I think MasterCard came up with its own kind of spec to kind of do this, I guess. But essentially what happened was, essentially at one point, at least in India, what happened was you had these small vendors, and kind of the government wanted to bring some digitization there. And you had people with like very, very small shops, or even, you know, on roadside vendors where people would hang only their queue. It was very easy to essentially create an account, generate a QR code, and then you can do bank-to-bank instant transfers just by scanning the QR. So I think this is kind of an interesting way to kind of, you know, as he said, like I completely agree with Erik that because there's a lack of infrastructure there, but there's also an opportunity to learn from the Western world, kind of skip a few cycles ahead, and kind of not fall into, not make the same mistakes, but essentially build something new. So I think some of these interesting things I kind of expect from Africa's and Asia's right now.
Okay, so there's one question. Future of TransferWise, Revolut, N26, and banks' reaction. I guess you would rephrase it to future of neobanks. So they acquired a very large number of users, clients, customers. So what's the next move? And are banks enemies, or they help and adapt, or how these relationships are built?
I think like the term as like banking as a term is also like transforming in time. So if 10, 20, 30 years ago customers were using some bank and it was offering them a set of products, maybe 30 different products, starting from cards, ending up with home loans. And I think the industry is transforming in a way that now people are actually getting the same services from different financial marketplaces. So now instead of like one bank or organization dealing with like hundreds of different mediocre services, we have those narrow focused smaller companies who do one thing, but then they do it in the best way in the world. And then through APIs, different marketplaces come into play which integrate those providers, and then you have let's say one marketplace app, and you can access not 100 mediocre services, but all of them from different providers, which are actually the best ones for your particular case. So I think if I think about TransferWise, what we are focusing quite strongly on is opening our APIs and expose and give to the world and other organizations an ability to use those things that we are good at. And if they want to be part of that, then they can just integrate and offer our services through, for example, their apps to their customers. And this happens with N26, so we are actually partners. So they have integrated TransferWise into their app, and like a bunch of other smaller and bigger banks as well. And what we see today is that bigger and bigger banks are actually showing the interest in offering our services to their customers, because they also care about their customers, and they want to offer them something which is good.
So it's a startup thinking of focusing on solving one problem, right? And then aggregating all of those.
I think the interesting trend that I see was at some point you had a lot of bankers involved in this, but now you have a lot of techies involved in banking. So I think there's a kind of a paradigm shift where a lot of banking has become very SME oriented, essentially subject matter experts, but it's everything is built from an API first point of view. So you have a lot of say in terms of technical, you know, you have a lot, essentially you build a bank with more technical people, which is like a paradigm shift. I think it's interesting. Yesterday we saw this talk where I think Ivania was mentioning the puck kind of moves away. I think it's kind of that, like I see that as a reaction of traditional banks, because now essentially everything is moving towards tech, and I think that is why you have this massive disruption. And because I think tech has been dominating in all the industries in last 10-20 years, and it's quite mature, I think this is like a good, it's kind of peaking out in even this industry.
Hello. So I don't have an answer, but I have something like a half a question. So right now, like users are attracted because of the nicer UI and the whole experience, and also because of the cheaper price per transaction and so on. But how long do you think you can keep on driving the price down? How long can you compete with the banks? And at some point, isn't the user experience be the only factor into that?
So if this was targeted specifically for TransferWise, because you were looking at me, so I can actually at least like answer on behalf of TransferWise. So we have this thing which is called the Mission Zero. So we believe that moving money internationally should be as easy and cheap and frictionless as sending an email. So in reality, what is actually happening electronically is like very similar. In reality, it's just bits and bytes moving. So whether we will actually reach this point, will it be actually eventually completely free? It's hard to say. But we are really like working on every quarter to achieve that. Sometimes things backfire, so we sometimes like had even to increase the prices to keep operating sustainably. But our like overall main goal is to actually keep pushing it down until we get to that theoretical zero. And that's why most likely integration through APIs with organizations with such mindset might be the best strategy. So instead of competing and putting a lot of effort into that, it's just easier to integrate and share this experience with your own customers. So in this sense, I don't like competition or having bigger or smaller enemies. I'm always for the collaboration.
I think that answers most of it. I don't have much to add, but even for me, it's like in the end, whatever happens in terms of whatever companies stay, I think it always benefits the customers. So in this sense, I don't really think in terms of businesses and companies that will remain, but the only good thing about this is some companies, will kind of dominate or win or whatever, but essentially it is always beneficial for customer. Making banking simple should be the goal. It should be essentially just transferring data over the wire, which is now pretty cheap, like data. So yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, so one more question. Again, Europe-centric. So in Europe, in retail, what's the future of printed money? Will it be there, and for how long? What do you think? So do you have to get rid of your paper money now, or keep them for a little while?
So in terms of stats, we can actually see like different pictures in different parts of Europe. For example, in Germany, it's close to 30% where all transactions in retail are being done in old school cash. For example, in Sweden, one of the most digital societies, this number is like smaller than 10%. Looking like how slowly the usage of money is actually reducing, well, it might look actually quick to someone, but I have a feeling that there will be still old school people who will be preferring to use cash for quite some period of time.
Unless it's forbidden.
Then you need to speak with central banks about that.
Yes. So, any other thoughts on cash now? Cash is good. All right. Okay, the question is, what is the best way to encourage the underbanked to adopt new payment and authentication methods? Right. I guess it's to forbid cash again. Yeah. So it's not maybe relevant to Europe so much. Let's take another question. Or you have opinions, no? We're actually running out of questions, so please help us.
Let me try and take a stab at the last one. Underbanked, because I have some familiarity with it. I think the idea is there's two things that are involved. One is security, like people who are generally tend to be a little, traditional in their view of banks. Sometimes I think may have an opinion that doing an online transaction might be less secure. Like, I think this for me is like one big aspect, and the second is probably ease. Like, I think to some extent this kind of worked with some force from the government also in India. Like, you essentially make something easy, and then you have some knowledge spread, or call it awareness or whatever, but essentially if there is demand, if it's easy, and over time I think it becomes easier. And there was also some force, but I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, essentially for me it's making it easy, and I think as fintechs, I think the ease bit is what we kind of always try to target. It helps with the people who are already familiar with tech, so it's very easy for that. I think it takes some time and for the traditional old school folks to adopt.
So I think all this easier relates mostly to smartphones, and I don't think the underbanked people are the owner of smartphones. So,
but that's actually smartphones these days have become very cheap, right? So to speak, like you even in, like, I'm talking also from a developing nation perspective, not just Europe, obviously. When you talk about smartphones, you don't always have to talk about Apple, iPhone X. There are like other variants available, and software has become easy, and data has become quite cheap. So I think also in a lot of places, even in countries like India, which was typically more underbanked, not very familiar with modern banking techniques. I think with this explosion in smartphone industry and data becoming very, very cheap, is something that a lot of people do try it. And if you essentially see someone who knows how to operate it, and if you do it once, if it's NFC, essentially all you do is tap, I think it kind of bridges the gap where you need to have some technicality. So not like it's not 100%, but I think this is kind of we are kind of already getting there.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would add from myself that we have a small, tiny Baltics, I guess Latvian or Baltics example with Smart ID. So previously, everyone would log in into internet bank with some sort of plastic card, and then they've been told, okay, you have to use a smartphone with a pin on Smart ID, and there was some resistance, but then all generations started to use it, I guess, except those who prefer physical RSA tokens. Yeah, so a little push would be needed as well. Okay, so if I have some more questions, do we? Oh, a question about Asia as well. Who should answer that? In Asia, a street vendor can start receiving payments as easy as just installing an app on their phone. In Europe, it's not as simple. You usually would need a bank-sponsored POS, etc. Will it change? Will it become simpler in the nearest future here? And why is it so simple in Asia? Do you know?
All right, I think the way it works in India, I don't know if you've heard about it, but India sometime back launched this thing called the UPI, which is like Unified Payment Interface, which is essentially kind of a collaboration between governments and banks, that every bank supports these APIs, and then you can build something on top of it. And I think this kind of changes the game because now even a street vendor can open an account with any bank, which is like, and this is kind of regulated, so has to be supported by all nationalized and big banks across. So essentially, if you have a bank account, all you can do is go on this app and kind of generate a code. And then essentially it's basically just scanning and paying. So I think this kind of needs some initiative from a central party, which at least helped it in India. So here there is no, at least with open banking, we have something going on, but you essentially need something which is consistent and works everywhere, and then you build something on top of it to kind of bring these newer innovations to market.
Yes. Okay. No. All right. One more question. If ISO 8583 is insane, what about ISO 222? Does it have the future? So the second one is exchange format, which is XML based, I guess, for banks. Do you see something replacing that one, or it will stay?
I just don't remember numbers. Is it the same standard that is used for instant payments?
Yes.
Yes. Then it's even more insane. The last time I looked, how this standard came to be, it's actually Swift collaborated to implement it, and I was shocked because there are a set of fields for accepting checks, like checks in the USA checks. So why would a protocol for the future include that? And
all protocols are insane. We know that. Okay, that's an interesting one. Some thoughts on crypto money. Is it payment at the end of current understanding of banks' money value and its infrastructure? So what is the future of crypto? Should we buy it now?
So because it's a very awkward moment, maybe I will just kick it off. So to be honest, like blockchain in general sounds like a very ineffective way of making transactions or for example moving money from one location to another. But the strengths of the blockchain is, for example, acting as a proof of some history, like for example, very reliable way of timestamping things. So potentially, in conjunction, we could have some really like taking the best of both worlds and implementing something which is efficient in real time, lightweight, resilient, and scalable for financial transacting, and then in addition to that, having something which maybe like in some cases is very needed to act as a very, very reliable source of proof that that was the case.
I agree that the current implementations of the blockchains, not all of them, but most of them are inefficient of how they're transferring the money. Of course, there are people who are thinking how to optimize it, like this off-chain lightning networks, all of these things. But this is actually very interesting from the payments perspective, that it's an alternative which is already there for almost 10 years, so it will still there, still not dead. So it's actually very interesting to see, will it be there in 10 years? And if yes, then what will be the form of this cryptocurrency, crypto money, whatever it will be called? Because with all these new players who are joining the game, like with this Facebook started as well to take a look and take it pretty seriously, and aggregating and inviting other big players to participate in that. So it's will be interesting to see how and where it will go. Hard to predict, but I think it's money right now. You can really pay for that, but not so accepted. And they are, there was a question about accepting the money, for example. This is one of the biggest strengths of cryptocurrency, that anyone can accept the money. So that can be an answer for the previous question, like why someone can accept the money easily and someone cannot. So this is just use another way and you'll accept the money. And actually there are standard businesses who are accepting cryptocurrencies, and it doesn't mean that they're like, hiding money or something like that. And acquiring fees are much lower, of course. So it's definitely a money.
And acquiring fees for cryptocurrency are much lower?
Yeah, because there is like these servers or providers like, like payment gateways who are providing nice interfaces and etc. They are taking up to 1% as well. So there's PTC Pay, I think it's the biggest one in US. So you just go their website and you download their software, you put your logos and you pay them fee. So, and you become the acquirer with all this checkout plugins and all of these things. So they are building the infrastructure as well for the merchants to, in easy way, to accept the payments. And the benefit of that is that basically it should be future-proof. If right now we are adding card payments, you need to adjust 3D Secure to a new version, right, from the merchant perspective. Anyway, upgrade, anyway, development. Then you remove these bank links, you add these open banking payments, right? So it's development, and actually it's not a cheap one as well for the merchants. And then there is alternative, which you just put the software, which is actually some of them are open source as well. But the thing that you need to be a little bit techie merchant to deal with that. But yeah.
But is it true to say that the reason you cannot bring your cryptocurrency from external sources to your wallet is strictly regulatory, and there are no ways around it. Therefore, this kind of movement is a bit blocked.
I heard actually some of the companies, e-money institutions, are right now building the white way, which is regulated way, how to insert or kind of jump from one world to another world. There are such e-money institutions who are taking it pretty seriously because they see that there is a potential, and they are building it with the regulators how to, and actually with even I heard that with some cooperation with the banks as well, because money means that they need to at some point arrive to the bank as well. So it's better to cooperate, otherwise you will not reach to the destination you want. But anyway, there are movements to build a regulated way how to enter the world from the cryptocurrency to the fiat basically, and then back to the cryptocurrency. So from non-regulated to the regulated and back and forth.
Okay, so we have time for last questions. That's a strange one. So do you believe Pepsi schema is a realistic project and how it might change the game? Do you know what it is? I think I saw it somewhere. Like
yeah, Dmitry, I think you need to open the Google and we need to quickly.
Okay, so not you don't know about this, right?
Don't Google the question.
Yeah, what's Pepsi schema?
So we are waiting for the last question, which is not here. Who will be first?
I have a question.
Yes.
Will there be a PaymentConf next year?
Yes, that's a good question. So we are relying on data science for these decisions, and therefore we would need a large percentage of attendees to fill our questionnaires in order to determine how disappointed or excited they are after the event, and then we could make this decision. Because if no one comes, what's the point? But if everyone liked it, well, why not? So we don't know.
But then let's make a question to the audience. Did you like the PaymentConf this year?
Okay, so we need Yanis to facilitate, no? But that's actually not the end. We'll have one more presenter, so we may. Maybe they will change. Yes. Maybe that one would change their minds. So I guess we run out of questions and we run out of time. And so this was interesting. Many thanks for your opinions and thoughts. And let's jump to the next item on the schedule.